Thanks for staying with us. The number of young girls who are falling pregnant has reached a crisis point in our country. And in a bid to curb the increase in teenage pregnancies, government is tightening the law. Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga has implemented a policy that requires schools to report underage pregnancies to police. This means educators will have to inform the police if a pupil under 16 falls pregnant. In the past couple of years, pregnancies among school-going girls have increased sharply, with children as young as 10 becoming mothers. For some reaction to the prevention and management of pregnancy policy, I'm now joined by Naptosa's Basil Manuel. Basil, good evening to you, and thank you so much for your time, Mr. Manuel. Let's then begin with Naptosa's reaction to this particular policy.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. Naptosa, of course, welcomes the policy as one of the measures that we can use to ensure that we stem this tide. Remember that no one thing is an absolute. However, if you just imagine a 10-year-old giving birth to a child, you can see that we really do have a problem and that we need to do something about it. So we welcome the step by the Minister. There are some issues we'd like clarified, and there are some issues that we would have to work through together. But all in all, we are more than satisfied with what is on the table.
Before we get into the responsibilities of families as well as the school themselves who failed to report, I'm keen to hear which areas of this policy would you need clarification on?
We are worried about some of the implementations. For example, schools having to report, that is good and well, given what they know. However, if a child simply just doesn't come to school and stays away, we don't have the resources necessarily to chase that up. And we want to explore that further. You know, there was a time when we had things like your truant officers, etc. And we want children to be at school, and we want to be able to give effect to the policy of supporting those children. However, we want to see what resourcing there would be. We're worried about the capacity in the police force to also follow through and follow up on some of these issues, simply because we've seen how the number of policemen have been reduced over time. And we want to see that there's effective utilization of that type of resource and support for schools in this. It is not the primary responsibility of schools to chase this up, but we also want to see that none of our children are taken advantage of, and that the miscreants out there that are taking advantage of our children will, of course, also have to be prosecuted.
Given what you're saying, especially around police and resources, we know just how scarce some of the resources are within the police service. And let's then look at maybe, are you leaning more towards making sure that the resources are within the school themselves, maybe have dedicated officers or social workers that could be dealing with some of these cases at school level?
For one, we certainly do need psychological services. When you are 10 years old and you have a child, you are not mature enough to even know what to do next. So that is a given. However, in terms of police, we need police to move closer to the schools in terms of having fixed people that we can report to. But no, we don't want to take over the role of police. Every group has its own role, and we want to see the police force getting supported more. They play a vital role in this, and if they are not supported and if they don't have the resources, then we have another beautiful piece of paper that we can't give effect to.
One of the things that has been difficult, especially speaking to the Education Department last night, they say that some of the parents are making things very difficult, especially when it comes to reporting such cases. You have parents that are going to say, for example, no, there's no case that now needs to be opened because the families have reached a consensus, or the child themselves may not necessarily be coming forward to talking about what exactly may have happened to them. So how then do you propose that, you know, the schools become very vigilant here? Because as you say, implementation is really going to be at the very center of this policy actually succeeding.
I think the policy has within it a couple of very important directions. such as that it is not only the child themselves that need support, it's the parents as well. It's the guidance of the parents, and of course, even the fathers, if they are also minors themselves. And I think when once a culture of mutual respect and trust has been established, we could get beyond this age-old problem of paying for damages and getting away with a criminal offense. And it is a criminal offense because we also have to point out that the life chances of this little girl have been greatly diminished by having a child. And if there is not enough support coming from both the parents and the school and the police, we are not going to see that child reach their full potential. And this is the greatest fear. It is not so much about wanting the parents to feel pressurized, but rather to improve the life chances of those children. And let's face it, they've been taken advantage of.
And because we all agree that they've been taken advantage of, I mean, a 10-year-old, really pregnant and being expected to go into full term is something that really boggles the mind. I wonder then if we should still be calling them underage pregnancies and not necessarily rape, because that's what they are.
I can't agree more with you. That's exactly what it is. You cannot tell me that that is not rape. It is absolute rape. And, we've had these statistics and we are all shocked by them, but we haven't had a concomitant statistic to show these are the arrests we've made in this relation. And I think that this is what the policy tries to address. But I agree with you, euphemisms are of no value at this stage.
Now, when we then are looking at this, I wonder then, as we wrap up, what becomes then the role of the families, especially where, because sometimes in some of these cases, a child that impregnates another is actually within their own age group, probably 14 or so. How then do parents begin to deal with their own children, especially young boys, who also need to be taught about their own responsibilities here?
There's an important point to make here. We mustn't think that those families from which this boy comes are free of the responsibility. But it's also about teaching that young boy about his future responsibility. At the moment, he may be underage. There is a time when he will be of age and he will have to support. And we've got to inculcate that culture where we do away of absentee fathers. Even an underage child can be taught that they have a responsibility, even though it may come later. But the parents of that child must know that they too carry a responsibility towards that poor little girl who is now sitting with less life chances than that boy is sitting with.
And I wonder, at the same time, if you think about it, I mean, we talk about how this has reached crisis level. It has, and quite a long time ago. It's just that some of these cases, as some activists are saying, were not finding their way into the public domain. Would you say that we're seeing more and more cases being reported right now? And is Naptosa satisfied with the current statistics that we're seeing, or do you think there could be more young girls that we don't hear about?
Let me start by first acknowledging all those organizations that have been working so hard to bring this into the public eye. The fact that we are seeing more of it is partly due to their success. There's greater reporting. But Naptosa agrees with them in the main that there is still underreporting. There are still cases that simply just don't reach the public eye, where these children just disappear from schools and nobody knows what has happened to them. So we need to be far more vigilant, and we need to have the resources to follow up when children drop out of school. We may then discover even more. But I sincerely hope that this is peaking at this stage and that we are going to see a turnaround with this and other interventions that are in place.
All right, Mr. Manuel, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That's Naptosa's Basil Manuel.